In this Diablo 4 video, I'm going to be showing you my Shadow Barrage Rogue Build. This is a level 50 plus Rogue Build that's focusing on World Tier 3 and the use of the Barrage Skill. So first, let's take a look at Barrage and what it does. It's a marksman skill that's imbuable, and it sort of channels your character in place, shooting out 5 arrows that expand sort of in a V pattern from you. And you can hold this button down and it will literally empty your energy pool just channeling arrows over and over and over. Arrows that strike enemies have a 20% chance to ricochet off them one time, dealing a little bit less damage. But when you hit an enemy that's vulnerable or critically strike an enemy, it is guaranteed to ricochet, allowing you to spread around status effects very easily with this skill because arrows bounce all over the screen. And even better is that every third cast of this, it makes enemies vulnerable that it hits for 2 seconds. This tends to be the whole screen when this fires off because of the ricochets, as I mentioned before. Particularly when you combine this with the aspect of branching volleys, which makes it so that Barrage's arrows have up to a 50% chance to split into 2 arrows when they ricochet, allowing you to spread this around even more. Now, you definitely want this on your two-handed weapon in order to get the most ricochets possible, because the idea here is that you want to hit as many enemies as possible on the screen with this in order to spread around damage. So there are really 2 problems with Barrage. First, it drains your energy extremely rapidly when you're just sitting there holding the button down as you just go through all of your energy in a hurry. And secondly, you have to be able to stand there and live while you're doing this. So you have to solve being able to heal yourself and have damage resistances while also being able to keep your energy up so you can keep up the Barrage. So let's talk about how we keep our energy topped up first. And the first thing we're going to take a look at is consuming shadows. This makes it so each time you kill an enemy with shadow damage, you generate energy. And when you use Shadow Imbuement, this happens all the time. So Shadow Imbuement is really your way to keep this engine going, and you typically want to switch over from your Poison Imbuement, which you lead off with to soften up enemies, into your Shadow Imbuement in order to finish them off with shadow damage to replenish your energy, so you can sit there and just keep draining while you keep exploding enemies. And though not specifically relevant to energy, the Toxic Alchemist aspect makes it so that when you lucky hit an enemy that's poisoned with a Shadow Imbuement skill, you have a 75% chance of a toxic explosion that deals poison damage to the target and all surrounding enemies, further spreading around poison damage. Now, I don't have that in this build here because I did not get a good roll of this, and the damage of this keeps needing to be increased, and I had a lower level one, but this is one you could slot on here that would work really, really well for this build. We also use the Innervation passive, which makes it so that on lucky hit, you have up to a 30% chance to gain 8 energy. This happens all the time because you're constantly getting lucky hits with this build. We also have Alchemist's Fortune 2 ranks here that makes it so your non-physical damage gives you a 10% increased lucky hit chance, and a couple other passives at the bottom of the tree that also help with energy regeneration as well as movement speed. I also want to mention that we're using the Caleb the Nameless here. This is a unique helmet that makes it so that you gain up to 25% increased lucky hit chance against crowd control enemies. This is really, really good to help facilitate that Innervation passive as well as any of the other passives, like the aspect of Toxic Alchemist, which I just mentioned. It also has Dexterity cooldown reduction on it, which is great for both of our imbuements that we're using, as well as our ultimate ability and our trap skill. So cooldown reduction, can't get enough of that. Crowd control duration increased and max energy. This means when you go into combat starting your Barrage, you're going to have a lot more pool to start with before you empty it. Other ways we gain energy are from the Combat Glyph, which not only increases our critical strike damage with core skills, which works great because we get a lot of crits with this build with using Barrage, which is our core skill, but also makes it so those critical strikes restore 12% of the energy cost of the skill. So you can restore a lot of energy this way by critically striking with Barrage, and since it fires out a lot of arrows, this tends to happen regularly. Another item that we're using for energy regeneration here is Mother's Embrace. This is the ring you get from finishing the game, and also it can drop. It happened to me while I was filming this video. Unfortunately, I also minimum rolled on that one, which sucked. But it makes it so that if you use a core skill and hit up to 5 enemies or more, you refund up to 40% of the resource cost. This is huge. That could reduce Barrage's cost by 40% each time you're using it on top of all the other ways we have gaining energy, so you'll net energy when using Barrage a lot of the time because of this ring if you're hitting a lot of enemies. And I also have the Ravenous aspect here. This makes it so if you kill a vulnerable enemy, it grants you up to 70% increased energy regeneration for 4 seconds. We are constantly setting enemies vulnerable. Remember that every third cast of Barrage will hit everything on the screen for vulnerable practically. So this makes it so your energy regeneration is a lot higher. You can put any other one that helps to regenerate energy here. The idea is you want your 2 rings or at least 2 slots to have energy regeneration or some form of getting energy back so that you can keep your Barrage going. So that's the energy side of this build. Let's talk about the survivability side of this build so that you can stay alive. And the most important legendary aspect probably for this build, just to make this build work so you can actually stand there and tank hits, is the aspect of Cruel Sustenance. And what this does is it makes it so the explosions that trigger from the Victimized Key passive heal you for each enemy damaged up to a maximum of X amount of life. These trigger constantly. And what Victimize does is it says on lucky hit from dealing direct damage, so not poison damage, to a vulnerable enemy has up to a 30% chance to cause an explosion, dealing 23% of the original damage to them and surrounding enemies, which works fantastic for this build. Because when you're firing into a group of enemies with Barrage, especially when you set vulnerable every 3 shots, this is going to trigger all the time, and when it does, it's going to be healing you. And keep in mind too that when we use Puncture, which is our basic attack for this, the upgrade we're using sets vulnerable on a target. So if you set them vulnerable and then you fire into them with Barrage, you're going to heal yourself up and, set a lot of these explosions on that target, which can be great to help heal you in a hurry. This key passive alone, combined with that aspect, allows you to face tank tons and tons of damage. It won't be enough to keep you alive as you go higher and higher in Nightmare Dungeons, but it's enough to get you a chunk of the way there. You'll probably have to stack a damage shield even on top of this at some point, because you need to be able to stand there and take a couple hits, and this is the way that we do that. And what's great about it also is because it deals damage at the same time, so you're going to get explosions into this group, on top of explosions from the Shadow Imbuement, on top of explosions from the Toxic Alchemist thing, if you have that in this build. There's a lot of explosions into AoE, making it so that you have a way to deal with large groups of enemies very effectively, which is something that Marksman kind of has trouble doing without using Penetrating Shot. We also have the aspect of the Crowded Sage. This makes it so that you heal for X amount of life per second for each close enemy, and this is when you'll have to upgrade continuously as the amount of life you heal goes higher and higher as you move through the game. But this makes it so that when you're surrounded, you're going to keep healing yourself, which is absolutely fantastic. On top of this, when you'll just keep healing life, and as long as you get something like a damage shield later on, you should be able to keep yourself topped up, no problem. Now, for offensive aspects, I basically just focus on anything that gives me critical chance or attack speed, and that's because you want Barrage to fire faster, so arrows fly out faster, hitting enemies more, ricocheting around more, dealing damage and explosions more. You literally are trying to get to the point where you cannot attack fast enough because you cannot run out of energy. So you want attack speed, and then obviously you want criticals as well in order to kill enemies faster. Now for your ultimate, you can basically use 2 ultimates. You can either use Shadow Clone or you can use Rain of Arrows. Shadow Clone is fantastic for this build because it's basically going to make the clone do exactly what you do with it. And there's even an aspect that you can put on your gear that makes it so that they benefit from your imbuements and they have increased damage when you buff with imbuements. And this is great because you can sit there with the Shadow Imbuement and unload into a group of enemy with your, Shadow Clone standing next to you, never running out of energy, and he'll never run out of energy, and you guys will both unload into a group of enemies and just wipe them out. So that's a really good one. However, I have the Word of Hakan here, which is a unique necklace that makes it so that Rain of Arrows is always imbued with all imbuements at once. And this is fantastic. It applies Shadow, Poison, and Frozen to all enemies it hits on the screen, knocks them down. This is a room clearer. You lead with this anytime you sense danger, you see anything through the door that looks like it has a damage resistance, you see an elite or anything you sense danger, just fire this ability and then start unloading with Shadow imbued Barrage into it, triggering explosions and just wiping out the screen. The idea here is that you're going to regenerate energy, and you're going to keep blowing through it with Barrage, which allows you to take the preparation, specialization, and reduce the cooldown of this ability so that you can use it every time you need it. And I would also advise that if you don't have a lot of cooldown reduction, which you should have some on this gear, but I like min rolled on the necklace, which wasn't great. But look for cooldown reduction on gear, and if you don't have enough, wait to open the next door before your things come off cooldown, because you want to make sure you at least have some of your abilities off cooldown. You want to make sure you have an imbuement or two in your trap ability. But, if you really sense danger in the next room, don't open it until this ability is off cooldown. With enough cooldown reduction, you can actually make it so that the timing is perfect between trash pulls and you don't have to wait. And the last thing I want to mention is that the second Paragon board I took here is Cunning Stratagem, and it doesn't make a lot of sense right now because the bonus to it isn't going to affect you because you're not using combo points. However, it does have a lot of nodes for core skill damage, and you want to crank Barrage's damage as much as possible. So until you have a lot more points and you can refund and pick a different board, this is a really, really good option for you to pick up a lot of passive nodes that give damage to core skills, so you can just keep cranking the damage of Barrage. Another good board to pick, if you don't want to pick that one, which makes a lot more sense probably when you're like closer to level 70, is No Witness, which increases your ultimate damage by 30% and then increases your damage for a period of time after you cast your ultimate ability, which works great because you're going to throw up Rain of Arrows and then start unloading. And it has a lot of nodes in the tree that just increase your damage in some way or another, increasing your critical strike damage, damage against healthy enemies, etc. So you're going to get more damage out of your ultimate and your abilities this way as well. So I would consider probably long-term going No Witness, but then potentially using the other one early on. So that wraps up our Shadow Barrage build. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This build is a ton of fun to play, and I don't even have this thing like maximized right now. Like the amount of energy regeneration I have could be better so that I can literally sit there and hold it down even when there's like a few enemies that I'm hitting. And I just didn't get all the gear to drop, but you can see that it's taking shape, and I think at even higher levels, the amount of damage this will be able to crank out is great. You just have to figure out how to survive while you can stand there at higher levels. But if you're looking for a good 50 to 70 rogue build, that's a bow build, and it's not like penetrating shot or, you know, it's not a twisting blades build, then why don't you check this one out? Stay tuned for more build guides as we check out other rogue builds and other builds for other classes, and more Diablo 4 content is coming your way. What did you guys think of the build? Do you guys have questions or comments? Let me know in the comments below.